Hey gang, I'm in Hopkinsville, Kentucky right now, and I'm at Riverside Cemetery, and we're going to visit the grave of a pretty famous guy. A guy, when I was in my 30s, I read books. Edgar Cayce. Many of you may have heard of him. A man who was known as a spiritualist, a prophet. I call him the modern day Nostradamus. Do you know who that is? Let's go for a walk and I'll tell you the story. Very old cemetery here. Some beautiful monuments we'll see on the way. He was the son of a farmer near this town, about 7 miles south of here. And when he was 16, the family moved here. Young Edgar received up to an 8th grade education, which was normal for the time. He had initially worked at a dry goods store and later at a bookstore. And in early 1900, he joined his father selling Woodman of the World insurance. You know, the Woodman of the World stones we see at many of the cemeteries. In April of 1900, he was struck with a severe case of laryngitis. He was, of course, not able to speak, remaining at home and unable to work. They brought in a stage hypnotist, which was entertainment at the time, to see if he could help. And I guess it worked out, because after a few sessions, his voice came back. And this might be an instrumental turning point in his life. Minutes after he came out of his hypnotic trance and was able to speak normally, he would voluntarily go into trances and then offer people, starting with neighbors and friends, free treatments to help them with their afflictions, which were unsolvable, supposedly at the time, by medical science. And a lot of these remedies were, you know, eat healthy, work out, stay outside, all the stuff that we've, you know, so there's a little bit of coincidence on that stuff. All the stuff that we've learned today that we do to stay healthy. He must have been ahead of his time and known about it. So the word was getting around about young Edgar Cayce, and within a short matter of time, you know, everybody was coming, and they were bringing their kids. So he never charged a penny for any of this work. You would basically come in and, you know, with the typical therapist, you would lay on the couch, but with Edgar, he would go lay on the couch and he would go into a trance and you would listen. And it was uncanny. He was really correct on a lot of his, well, we'll call it advice. It's very interesting here. It says, I am the resurrection and the life. Let's take a closer look here of the Perry Monument. Reverend Gideon Babcock Perry, DDLLD, born in South Kingston, Rhode Island, 1800 to 1879. He died here. And there's a likeness in bronze, or it might be copper. So this is somebody really interesting that we happened upon here, the Reverend Gideon Babcock Perry, and I'll read his obituary. Back in the day, it said that he had died at the family residence here in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in his 79th year. Recently was the late rector of Grace Episcopal Church in the city, formerly rector of Trinity Church in Natchez, Mississippi, which is a place we actually visited early this year. And he was a first rector at St. Paul's in Cleveland, Ohio, and other places. But what is really interesting is that it says, quote unquote, he was the last surviving kinsman contemporary of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, the hero of the Battle of Lake Erie. Now, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry is really, really famous. And yes, he was really heroic in the War of 1812, especially during the 1813 Battle of Lake Erie, as it mentioned. It was the war against Britain, of course, and it was a battle. I mean, you never think of these three-masted warships fighting in the Great Lakes, but actually that is where a lot of action happened. And Lake Erie, the War of 1812, at the beginning, the British Royal Navy controlled the Great Lakes, except for Lake Huron, and while the United States controlled Lake Champlain, the American naval forces at the time were pretty small, allowing the British to make a lot of advances in these Great Lake areas and northern New York waterways. But the roles played by commanders like Perry at Lake Erie and others like Isaac Chauncey at Lake Ontario were vital efforts that really made a difference to help the United States get things over on Britain. So it's way too long to get into the whole story here, but I will say that on September 10th, 1813, Perry's command fought a successful fleet action against a squadron of the Royal Navy in this Battle of Lake Erie. It was at the outset, Perry famously said, "If it's a victory is to be gained, I will gain it." And it was such showmanship and such gallantry in those days. And initially the exchange of gunfire favored the British, and Perry's flagship, the USS Lawrence, was so severely disabled that the British commander, Barclay, thought that Perry would surrender and actually sent a small boat over to request that the American vessel pull down its battle flag, and faithful to those words, "Don't give up the ship," old Perry, with Lawrence's Champlain and purser as the remaining able crew, personally fired the final salvo, and then had his men row him the half mile, which you see in the picture, through heavy gunfire to transfer his command to the USS Niagara. And then once aboard, Perry dispatched Niagara's commander, Captain Jesse Elliott, to bring the other schooners into closer action. And to make a long story short, he turned the entire battle around, and it was fairly brief after that. He said, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop." So for the first time in history, that an entire British naval squadron had surrendered, and every captured ship was successfully returned to a place called Presque Isle. So very, very famous guy. You never know what you're going to happen upon as you walk the cemeteries. Love these old stones, guys. There's some very large obelisks here. Let's continue on. It is said that he had 1,400, we'll call them therapy sessions. Records of all of them exist. He had a full-time secretary, and again, never charging a dime. He made money from volunteers and donations. Now, most of the questions were medical, and he would go down the line and do that. But then he would start to delve into other areas. Interestingly, previous lives, business advice, and world future events. Now, this is where things get really interesting. And this is where my fascination came in when I was young. In the next 20 years, he would make a number of predictions. By today's standard, normal, but back then, very unusual. A lot of them were wrong, but some of them were correct. He predicted that China would become the cradle of Christianity. I don't think so. He predicted that U.S. scientists would discover the lost city of Atlantis. I don't know, you tell me. I think that may have actually happened. Some say they found it. No one will really know for sure. You can't really prove it, I guess. He said the Earth's continents would shift significantly. I don't think that's happened. But he did predict the Great Depression, and he did predict World War II, and a number of other things. What I find particularly fascinating is that he had often said that all souls were created at the beginning of the universe, and that reincarnation does exist. I personally believe it. You've heard me on live when we've done that couple of live walks, the one I know. It's very fascinating about reincarnation. Many people don't believe in it, but for me, the body is dust to dust, but the soul moves on. Does it go to heaven? Does it stay here? Does it go into another being or a newborn? Questions to ponder. Whatever you believe. But it is fascinating to think about. Really interesting that he had said that the records from Atlantis can be found beneath the Egyptian Sphinx. And several decades after his death, no small coincidence, there was a tiny room detected by ground-penetrating radar down there beneath the Sphinx.
Up until his death in 1945, Cayce gave dozens of readings about the Sphinx. These readings claimed the Sphinx was directly related to an ancient civilization that many believe once existed here on Earth, the lost continent of Atlantis.
But Egyptian officials, they did not and will not allow excavation. And you can't blame them. Sadly, on January 2nd, 1945, Edgar Cayce suffered a severe heart attack, and that's when he died. The next day at his home in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is his grave right here. with his wife, Gertrude. Right here. A lot of mementos here for Edgar Cayce. March 18, 1877, January 3rd, 1945. Interestingly, his wife died just months after he did, April 1st, 1945. We often talk about that when the one soul goes, the mate follows soon after. All right, guys, I'm going to head out of here. Rest in peace to the Cayces. Here in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, I am off to the northwest on the next one on my mission. I'll see you later. Everybody be safe.